You know that feeling when you look in the mirror and think, I'm still here, but I don't feel like me anymore? You can't explain it. Nothing looks wrong from the outside, but inside, it's like your edges are fading. You've stopped laughing the way you used to. You second guess every word before you say it. And when you think back to the person you were before this relationship, it's like remembering someone else from another life. In this episode, I want to talk about that, about what really happens when you start losing yourself inside a relationship that keeps you small, why you stop trusting your own voice, why peace starts to feel like silence, and what begins to happen the moment you decide you want yourself back. Because I promise the woman you are looking for, she's still there. She's just waiting for you to remember her. I'm Kanchan Kulkarni, and I'm here to help you see the patterns that are keeping you stuck and the freedom that's waiting for you beyond them. So let's dig right in. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't wake up one morning and think, I've lost myself. It happens slowly in ways that almost make sense while they're happening. Because at first, it's the little things. You soften your tone because you don't want to sound harsh. You keep quiet about something that bothered you because you don't want to start another fight. You stop wearing that dress he doesn't like. You cancel plans with friends because he's had a rough week and you want to be there for him. Now, each thing on its own, it feels small, even thoughtful. Tell yourself this is what love does. Love bends, love adapts, love finds the middle ground. That sweet spot where both of you are happy. But somewhere along the way, you realize you're the only one doing the bending. You're the one always adapting. You're the middle ground. And the more you give, the calmer he gets. The less you push, the more he smiles. The quieter you are, the smoother the day goes. And that quiet, that calm starts to look like progress. It looks like peace until you notice that it doesn't feel like peace at all. It feels like it's all about him and nothing about you. It feels like there is only one person's needs that are important in the relationship. It feels like you don't matter, your needs are inconvenient. And that's when you start to slowly recede into the shadows and disappear. Now, here are some of the signs when that happens. You catch yourself hesitating before you speak. You think twice before you laugh. You choose your words like you're walking through a minefield, or as many of my clients say, walking on eggshells. And it starts showing up in your body as exhaustion because this suppression of ideas, feelings, dreams, and desires, it gets buried inside you. And as that piles up, it starts to get heavy. You used to have opinions, preferences, boundaries. Now, most of your sentences start with, it's okay. You say it's okay when it's clearly not. You say I'm fine when you're clearly not. And you dismiss your own pain as there is no space in the relationship for you to express it. And each time you do these things, a little more of you slips away. You tell yourself it's temporary, that things will get better when the stress passes, when he's in a better mood, when life slows down. But deep down, you know that not speaking up for yourself has become your new normal. And that's the part that hurts the most. There's no single moment or day you could point to and say, this is when I started fading. It's 1,000 small choices made in the name of keeping the relationship intact that has led you to give up pieces of yourself thinking it would protect the love. You thought it would bring you closer. Instead, it has made you invisible. You can feel it in your body. That heaviness sits in your chest when you wake up. The constant fatigue that doesn't go away no matter how much you rest. It's the weight of pretending, the pressure of keeping your real self under control so he doesn't pull away. Sometimes you wonder if you're being dramatic. You think he's not that bad. He's not that cruel. He's not that violent. And that's true. But cruelty isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it looks like love that only works when one partner's needs are met. You start to realize that the relationship is most peaceful when you're silent, when you stop asking for what you need, when you stop being you. And yet, there's a part of you, quiet but persistent, that misses yourself. You miss the way you used to laugh without checking anyone's face first. You miss speaking freely without rehearsing every sentence in your head. You miss having opinions that didn't need to be softened. You miss not having to fear making mistakes because that is how you learn and grow. You miss being listened to like you matter. But most of all, you miss belonging to yourself. That ache, that low, steady ache. That's the part of you that's still alive. she hasn't disappeared. She's just been quiet, waiting for you to notice she's missing. And when you hear her, even faintly, it hurts because it reminds you that you traded pieces of yourself for something that never truly made you feel safe. You start to realize that love shouldn't have required for you to disappear. It shouldn't have made you afraid of your own voice. It shouldn't have depended on how well you can manage someone else's moods. And maybe for the first time, you let yourself admit to yourself, I don't feel like myself anymore. And it's not okay. That sentence carries more power than you realize because it's not weakness speaking. That's awareness. You can't heal what you won't name, and you just named it. You're disappearing. And somewhere inside you, the part that remembers who you used to be is asking for you to come home. When people talk about losing themselves in a relationship, they usually think it's about forgetting what you like or losing hobbies or not seeing your friends anymore. But it's deeper than that. It's not just that you've stopped doing those things that made you feel like you. It's that something inside you has started to doubt whether you're even real anymore. That's what erosion of identity feels like, not a sudden collapse, but a slow wearing down of your sense of self. It happens through small moments that seem harmless at first, a correction here, a criticism there, till eventually those tiny fractures start to make you and your foundation shaky and unreliable. You start to second guess your every move. The fear of getting it wrong leaves you paralyzed. And without realizing it, you begin to rely more and more on the very person who took your power away. Each time you defer to his opinion instead of your own, his voice grows louder and yours gets a little harder to hear. That's how self esteem begins to fade. It's not that you suddenly stop believing in yourself, it's that someone keeps holding a distorted mirror up to you. And because you care about them, because you've built your world around this relationship, you start believing that what you see in that mirror must be true. Every time they criticize, dismiss, or control you, your nervous system reacts. Your body learns, your unconscious mind registers that it feels safer to adapt to his needs instead of defending yourself. You call it compromise, you call it being understanding. But what it really is self protection disguised as peacekeeping. And over time, that pattern, it rewires how you see yourself. You don't realize it's happening because the mind always finds a way to make the unbearable make sense. It tells you stories like just too sensitive, or they're just under stress, or if I can just stay calm, things will be okay. There's no point both of us being angry all the time or being out of control all the time. You keep editing yourself, and that's not weakness, that's survival. When love starts to feel unpredictable, your brain tries to keep you safe by reducing the risk of conflict. And so you soften, you comply, you make yourself smaller, quieter, easier to love, not knowing that's also how learned helplessness forms. If you have not been here, this video is not for you. But if you have, I know everything I'm saying feels like I'm talking directly to you. So let me continue. Stay with me. When you keep trying again and again to bring things back to harmony, only to be punished or ignored each time, your body learns that there's no point trying anymore. If you continue to stay in that relationship, your body will have to find a way to bear the consequences so that not asking, asserting, wanting, expecting becomes easier than having your hopes destroyed daily. You don't stop because you've given up. You stop because you've been trained to believe that trying will only make things worse. You mistake endurance for strength. You call it patience, but what it really is fear. The fear of what will happen if you finally stop accommodating. And that fear isn't just emotional, it's physical. Your body stays tense, wound up like a tight spring. Your nervous system learns to live in a constant hum of anxiety. Peace starts to feel foreign and safety feels suspicious. And in that space, something even more subtle happens. You start to lose the sense of where you end and the relationship begins. You can't tell what's your opinion and what's his. You can't tell whether you're staying because you love him or because you're afraid of who you'd be without him. You think back to the version of you that existed before this relationship, the one who laughed loudly, spoke freely, trusted her own instincts, and she feels like a stranger even to you. You want to reach for her, but you can't remember how. Because now your identity isn't just tied to this person, it's built around them. Their approval, their moods, their perception of you, all of them become your reference point of how you move, and interact in this world. And when that's the only mirror you have, you stop seeing yourself clearly and you start believing the reflection they hand you, that you're difficult or you're dramatic or you're ungrateful. Here's one of the biggest things that keeps you stuck: isolation. Isolation seals the deal. You stopped connecting with friends he didn't like. You stopped calling your extended family because he refused to go to the family events and you couldn't defend his choices anymore. You stopped meeting people you could talk to because he accused you of infidelity. And slowly, the world around you started to narrow and shrink until your entire sense of worth became tethered to this one person, the very person who was eroding it. That's the cruel paradox of toxic relationships. It makes you depend on the source of your pain to define who you are. And when that happens, your self image becomes unstable. Remember that foundation I talked about earlier, the one which held your sense of self, your self esteem, your confidence? That starts to crumble under the weight of someone else's opinions of who you are. When they're kind, you feel lovable again. When they withdraw, you feel invisible and you become conditioned to start chasing the version of yourself that only exists when they are pleased with you. That constant cycle of criticism and approval trains your brain to associate safety with compliance. So every time you silence yourself, your body rewards you with a brief sense of relief, a false peace. But over time, that becomes the only peace you know. That's how you learn to disappear, not all at once, but piece by piece, through every apology you didn't owe, every opinion you swallowed, every time you convinced yourself that being easy to love meant being quiet. You forget that version of you who once felt whole. That version is still somewhere underneath all this conditioning. This isn't about blame. This is about understanding the cost of trying to stay safe in an environment that kept moving the goalposts for what safe even meant. Let me talk about what happens when you start to shift out of this pain, when you start coming back to yourself after disappearing. It doesn't feel like power at first, it feels like confusion. You expect to feel strong, but mostly you feel disoriented. You've been living for so long inside someone else's version of you that when their voice starts to fade, the silence it leaves behind is almost unbearable. And that's the part of you that wants to rush back to fill that emptiness with their approval, their attention, even their anger, anything that proves that you still exist. Because when you've lived inside someone else's emotional climate for so long, even chaos can feel like connection. That's the first stage of walking away from a relationship that took everything from you. The ache of withdrawal because you're not just detaching from the person, you're detaching from the pattern, you're detaching from a complete life. The highs and lows that once defined your days, the constant scanning for cues, the small wins that felt like oxygen, your body misses it all, even as your mind knows it wasn't love. And this is where most people doubt themselves. You start to wonder if maybe you made it all up. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe you're overreacting. That's your nervous system craving the familiar. It's trying to lure you back to the predictable chaos instead of the uncomfortable calm. Reclaiming yourself doesn't feel like freedom right away. It feels like standing in an empty house after everyone's gone home. It's quiet, still, and unsettling. You almost miss the noise. But if you give yourself time to embrace this calm, in that quiet, something unexpected starts to happen. You start to hear your own thoughts again. At first, they're faint, hesitant, difficult to understand fully, like voices echoing down a hallway. You pick up a few words, but can't really understand the content or the context clearly. However, if you stay in that space long enough, you start to notice small things like the way you like your coffee, the songs that used to make you feel alive, the instinct to laugh without glancing over to see if that's too much or too loud. It's uncomfortable and sacred all at once, like meeting yourself for the first time. And here's another thing you feel: grief. When you start to re-emerge, the grief hits harder than the joy. You grieve the years you spent being muted. You grieve the version of you that had to dim her light just to stay close to someone who couldn't handle her brightness. You grieve the illusion, the dream of who you thought he was, of what the relationship could have been if only you didn't have to try so hard, be so small, love so much to compensate for the love you didn't receive from him. That grief is real because now you can see the truth clearly that what you mistook for love was often fear in disguise. And the moment that realization lands, and I mean really lands, you have an aha moment that cannot be described in words. I have been privileged to see many aha moments in sessions with my clients. And they can vary from laughing uncontrollably to crying uncontrollably to going completely silent and into a trance state for several minutes. It's called processing. They are finally connecting the dots to how they ended up losing themselves. They notice what their body did when it was in a constant state of survival now that they're out of it. The insights, they keep coming as they continue to see how much they have been carrying. Sometimes they see themselves and their power in its entirety, and they realize how small they had made themselves because someone else was too insecure to let them shine. And little by little, the internal no starts to make room for something else, a soft yes. Yes to rest, yes to quiet mornings, yes to not needing to explain their worth to anyone. They realize that safety isn't the absence of conflict, it's the absence of disrespect. And truth doesn't always feel comfortable, but in a safe environment, it brings clarity. Clarity after years or even decades of confusion is priceless. This is the emotional consequence of shifting out of the pain. Your world starts to widen, but your tolerance for distortion starts to shrink. You start noticing when someone's tone carries contempt, and the fear that rises in you is not to shut you down, it's to remind you to speak up or walk away. When you feel that old urge to make yourself smaller, it stings now because your body knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's wrong. You start recognizing that peace and silence aren't the same thing, that someone else's comfort is not your responsibility, that love that requires you to diminish yourself is not love, it's dependency dressed up as devotion. And the most beautiful part of all, you begin to see yourself as someone worth protecting. Slowly, your nervous system starts to recalibrate. You start to feel the difference between calm and collapse, between silence and suppression, between being alone and being at peace. When people talk about finding themselves again, it sounds like a single event, like one morning you wake up and you remember who you are. But that's not how it happens. It's slower, it's quieter, and it's much less dramatic than you think. And it doesn't happen in the session with me. It's what happens after you walk out of that session and you start to live your life. That processing I talked about earlier keeps happening in the background. New dots keep getting connected to create a fuller picture of your life. And slowly, you start to see yourself through a kinder lens of who you want to be rather than who you were. Coming back to yourself looks like recognizing what you no longer want to explain away because your mind and body are learning that self expression doesn't need to lead to punishment anymore. And this is where most people underestimate the process. They think healing is about confidence, but it's really about safety. When you feel safe enough to take up space, confidence follows naturally. It's not about forcing yourself to be louder or bolder. It's about not abandoning yourself when you feel afraid. This is the point in recovery where the outside world might not see much of a difference in you, but you have changed in a way that is impossible to describe. And what's interesting is that once you reach the stage, you start to see the patterns more clearly, not just in yourself, but in others. Many women choose to help others in a similar situation because they understand how difficult it is to find a way out of the pain. And they want to be the role models and the torchbearers so others do not stay as stuck for as long as they did. So, as you listen to this, maybe just take a second to notice how your body feels right now. If it's tense, breathe. If it's heavy, take a break. If it's tired, rest. Because that's where clarity begins, not in the suppression of your feelings, but in the acceptance of them. So, my question to you, as always, is, are you ready? Until next time, stay safe and see you in the next episode.